The Stone Lotus. Written by Xavier Marze. To you, poetry. For lighting my way. With longings and sorrows. Prologue. Go Cong Provincial Hospital, 50 kilometers from Saigon, Vietnam. The 3rd of February 1968.
The rhythm of Paint It Black by the Rolling Stones was blaring on the radio, trying to soften the roar of mortar explosions that were falling very close to the hospital. 5 minutes ago, they had begun with a virulence such as they had never experienced before. And the worst part was that they were hitting closer and closer. The group of Spaniards, all members of the Spanish Health Mission in Vietnam, had barricaded themselves as best they could in the non-commissioned officers' barracks that was next to the rickety French building that they used to take care of their patients. They had some mattresses blocking the windows, and others forming rudimentary barriers to protect them individually. Normally, when these types of attacks started, they would play cards and tell jokes. Today everyone could feel that things were different. Perhaps it was because of the warning to Captain Francisco Fonde Rodriguez. That afternoon, several Vietnamese neighbors told him to stay in the hospital when he wanted to go for a walk, since that night there would be a loud boom boom. Alberto Romero de Soto looked at the room with a bit of apprehension and nervousness. At the age of 30, he had managed to reach the rank of medical captain after standing out during his assignment in Smara, the Spanish Sahara, integrated as an officer in the so-called nomadic troops. He had lush black hair about 3 centimeters long, neatly combed. Back in Spain his skin used to be fair-skinned, but now it was very tanned after so much time under the Vietnamese sun. He thought of his wife and son, who were waiting for him in Spain. It would be ironic if he was killed by a mortar, when he had been saving lives there for more than a year. Especially, taking into account that they have never cared about the political affiliation of their patients. Whether they were Americans, South Vietnamese, neighbors of Go Cong, or as they suspected, numerous Viet Cong fighters. They cared for all of them and tried to heal and save, within their diminished possibilities. The truth was that they had been working in precarious conditions all this time. But they were willing to fulfill their mission with as much dignity and professionalism as possible.
Who would think of having a hospital right next to the South Vietnamese General Staff?
He tried to make his voice heard above the music and the detonations.
The Americans know what they're doing, Romero. They thought it would be better protected this way.
He could hear the voice of Captain Manuel Vazquez Labadet, who was his liaison with the U.S. Army, the main ally of the South Vietnamese government.
Well, I don't see the Americans stopping the mortars with their baseball bats.
Lieutenant Antonio Alvarez, who was lying under one of the tables while trying to write a letter to his wife, always used jokes when he was nervous. A bang outside rattled the wooden windows and walls throughout the barracks. A pile of dust fell from the ceiling, causing everyone to shudder.
Fucking bitch. These bastards are going to listen to me when they come to ask us to heal them. They know we're a hospital. Is everyone okay?
Commander Agrippino Garcia Granados, head of the sanitary mission, got up to check on his men. Outside, they could hear the cries of alarm from the South Vietnamese soldiers guarding the hospital. You could tell they were getting more and more nervous.
I think there are wounded outside,
said Nguyen Minh Trao, one of the assistants who served as translators and who barely spoke a few words in Spanish.
Well, as long as the bombardment continues, we're not going out for fuck's sake.
Commander Garcia looked out in frustration. Meanwhile, Alberto kept telling himself that, if he hadn't suffered any mishaps while in the Sahara, nothing was going to happen to him there either. He clutched tightly the silver medal he wore with the image of the Virgin of Santa Maria de la Victoria, patron saint of Malaga, his hometown. The music from the radio was interrupted with interference just before another mortar fell in the middle of the barracks, causing a hole in the ceiling. Alberto felt the mattress smash him against the wall as he felt his ears ringing. For a few seconds everything was chaos. He tried to get up and check that he was okay. It looked like he hadn't been hit by shrapnel. He couldn't say the same about his mattress, which had received a good punishment, although it had probably saved his life.
Are you all okay?
He heard Commander Garcia cough, the smoke and dust making it very difficult to breathe.
My commander. Captain Linares and Brigadier Baz have been hit,
shouted Second Lieutenant José Bravo López Baños.
Romero Fonde, take care of the wounded. Alton and Perez, assist them. Vasquez, go see what the fuck the Americans are doing. Mintrao, please go and see how they are in the hospital. The rest, try to reinforce the room again and make sure there is no fire. I don't want this place to turn into a human barbecue.
Commander Garcia went from one place to another with a douche face. Alberto went towards Captain José Linares and Brigadier Joaquin Baz, who were the closest to the impact. Luckily, their mattresses had received most of the shrapnel. They only had wounds on their legs and arms, most of them superficial.
I have bad news, Pepe. These wounds aren't going to help you go home on vacation sooner.
Alberto smiled as he finished disinfecting Captain Linares' 4-centimeter-long but superficial wound.
Who said I wanted to leave first? A little shrapnel isn't going to get me out of this hellish paradise.
Linares tried to laugh. Alberto finished dressing him and after bandaging his leg, helped him to his feet so that he could lie down on one of the beds. It seemed that the Viet Cong had given them a break with the mortars. But now it was the bursts of machine gun fire and shootings that resounded non-stop. Luckily they were doing it far away, in the direction of Go Kong prison. Captain Vasquez returned with Assistant Nguyen Minh Trao and confirmed what everyone suspected.
The Viet Cong's offensive has reached this far. Assaults are taking place all over the region. The Americans say they have stormed the Chu Hoi prison and freed about 200 prisoners. They have suffered 2 casualties and several wounded,
he reported after meeting Commander Garcia.
The explosions have spared the main building, but the patients and relatives are very frightened.
Minh Trao added.
Goddamn sons of bitches, this is the last thing we needed. Alright, I want everyone working in the hospital at full capacity. Check that patients are well, reassure them, and be prepared to receive the wounded as they arrive. You know the dynamics. You're not newbies, let's get to the point.
Everyone nodded and prepared to carry out the orders.
My commander Baz and I can do the triage. Let us help, we are not in a situation to not use all the hands we can.
Linares asked, sitting up and looking at Baz, who nodded determinedly.
Okay, help them and let them collaborate too.
Garcia accepted as he emerged, cursing into the darkness outside, which was only broken by the intermittent glow of the street lamps and tracer projectiles that crossed the sky from time to time. The next 2 hours were frantic and chaotic. The mortar attack had turned out to be worse than they had initially thought. While they had suffered only 2 minor injuries, the South Vietnamese soldiers guarding the perimeter of the hospital had lost 8 men. They hadn't been able to do anything for them. Each life lost was like a thorn in Alberto's chest. He came from a long military tradition, but unlike his predecessors, he loved life, and even though he was a soldier, he had dedicated himself to saving as many people as he could. In all the time he had been in Vietnam, he had seen more people die than he had in his entire existence. A lot of people. And the worst part was the children. Many suffered from malnutrition, malaria, and other ailments. Although they tried to save them, most of them arrived at their doors when it was too late. It was 3 o'clock in the morning when 2 South Vietnamese soldiers entered, escorting a Vietnamese man who seemed very upset. Alberto recognized him instantly. It was Giang Hung, the husband of one of his patients who was in an advanced state of pregnancy. As soon as Hung saw Alberto, he began to speak to him hurriedly in Vietnamese. He didn't understand anything. He gestured for him to calm down, as he began to search the crowded room of beds he was in.
Minh Trao, what did he say?
Alberto finally located the assistant, who was helping Captain Fonde with a wounded South Vietnamese man. Minh Trao walked up to him and asked him in Vietnamese. After hearing his answer, he turned to Alberto.
Captain Romero, Mr. Jiang says that his wife has become very upset by the explosions, and that she looks like she is going to give birth. She's bled a lot.
Minh Trao translated as Hung looked on nervously.
Fuck, it couldn't have happened at a worse time.
Alberto cursed loudly.
Let's see, ask her if she started having contractions.
The assistant spoke again in Vietnamese, and rash words came from Hung's lips, who tried to pull the sleeve of Alberto's shirt to follow him. One of the soldiers violently pushed him away.
It's okay, it's okay. He's just worried.
Alberto told them in English.
He says he doesn't know, but his wife was screaming a lot. That was more than an hour ago. He is very worried about her and her baby.
Min Trao translated. Commander Garcia approached after seeing the stir the Vietnamese had caused.
What's the matter, Captain Romero?
He looked inquiringly at Zhang Hung.
We have a situation with his wife. She's one of our patients. I know her well. I've been tracking her pregnancy for the past 3 months with Lieutenant Alvarez. It looks like she's gone into labor, and it's going to be a tricky one. I don't think she'll survive without medical assistance,
he said sadly.
Well, as it is, I'm afraid there's nothing we can do. I'm not going to let anyone out of the hospital.
He shook his head. Hung became even more upset when he saw Commander Garcia make the negative gesture. He knelt in front of Alberto and implored him desperately, while still speaking in Vietnamese.
My commander, I can't let his wife and child die. His hut is not far, only 20 minutes drive.
Alberto looked at him determinedly.
There's nothing to discuss. No one is going to go out at night as long as the Viet Cong assault continues. We'll wait until dawn, and if things have calmed down and we get an escort from the Americans, then you can go. That's my last word. Now continue to take care of the wounded. We have a lot of work to do.
Commander Garcia's face left no room for doubt. Alberto clenched his fists, feeling that helplessness overwhelmed him. He took a deep breath and calmed down to help Hung up.
Tell him to sit here and wait. We can't go now, but as soon as the situation improves, I give you my word that I will go with him to check on his wife.
He asked Min Trao. He translated everything, and though Hung continued to tremble with nervousness, he nodded his face and sat down where he had been told. Just then, several South Vietnamese soldiers entered a comrade on a stretcher. He had a gunshot wound to his side. Alberto looked at his companions and they got down to work. Dawn finally came after 6 o'clock in the morning, and gunfire had stopped for 2 hours. The Americans had just reported that they had succeeded in repelling the assault of the Viet Cong. The militiamen had retreated again, and it seemed that Go Kong was once again free of danger. Although he felt his limbs were exhausted, Alberto always kept his promises. After bringing some water to Hung, he called Min Trao and Lieutenant Alvarez to accompany him to speak with Commander Garcia. He was in his office with a tired face. He was writing the report of the interventions carried out throughout the night.
My commander, with your permission.
Alberto greeted as he made his way through the entrance with the other two.
What do you want, Romero? You should take the opportunity to rest. We don't know how long the tranquility will last. It seems that this offensive is different from the others.
Garcia looked at them tiredly. He was hesitant to have any more problems.
My commander, the matter of Mr. Zhang's wife is still pending. Several hours have passed, and every minute that passes increases the potential risk to his wife and the baby they are expecting. I have already spoken with Lieutenant Alvarez and Min Trao, and they have agreed to accompany me along with Mr. Zhang. If we go out now, the Americans are now going to prioritize the evacuation of their wounded, Captain Romero. It's going to be impossible for them to clear the way for us, and even less for a pregnant Vietnamese woman.
Garcia put aside the papers, exasperated.
You should stop asking for the impossible, and accept that we can't save everyone. I'll never do that. As long as it is in our hands, we must do our best. You know this very well, my commander. And right now we still have time.
Alberto insisted, looking at Alvarez and Min Trao both nodding firmly.
You Andalusians are more stubborn than you seem. That's fine, but you go at your own risk. You have been informed of the risks you are taking. Even if the Viet Cong have retreated, they may have mined the road or run into some stragglers or run into an ambush.
He began to enumerate with his fingers.
Same shit, different day. It's our job, my commander.
Alberto smiled wryly, satisfied that he had convinced him in the end.
Anyway, come back in one piece and you'd better have that baby born healthy. He owes us for all the trouble he's going to cause us,
sighed Commander Garcia as he waved them off. The three of them returned to Hong, who looked relieved when Min Trao translated that they could go home now. After collecting the medical supplies in 2 bags, they went outside. The first light of the morning gave a glimpse of the impact zones of the mortars in the inner courtyard of the perimeter. The hospital was really falling apart. Alberto did not deny that it had once been majestic, in the French colonial era. But nowadays it was very rickety, and all those explosions made him fear that at any moment it would collapse completely.
It's my turn to drive.
Lieutenant Alvarez interrupted his thoughts, smiling broadly.
Shit. It's the same again.
Alberto lamented, not having been faster. Alvarez and Alberto stood at the front of the olive green Willys M151 Jeep, with the characteristic American white 5-pointed star. It had a soft top, and was one of the 2 vehicles that the Americans had given them for their trips around the hospital. In the back sat Min Trao and Hong respectively.
Come on. The sooner we get there, the sooner we can finish,
said Alberto, who was impatient to be able to take care of the pregnant woman. With a roar of the engine, they left the courtyard through the entrance gate, after greeting the South Vietnamese guards. They looked at them incredulously and shouted at them in English that they were crazy. They took the dirt track to the west, and were now crossing the bridge over one of the rivers that bordered Go Kong. They continued for almost 3 kilometers practically in a straight line, passing through a multitude of rice paddies. From time to time they came across peasants carrying water oxen, who, indifferent to what had happened during the night, resumed their chores in the fields. Then they turned northwest along the road that led to the hut cluster where Hong lived, about 6 kilometers away.
I'm going to slow down a bit. It looks like this has been a hot spot tonight,
Alvarez said, pointing to holes in the road and the remains of burned vegetation.
Who knows what happened? All right in the back.
He turned to Min Trao and Hong.
Yes, thank you for asking.
Min Trao replied in his attempt at Spanish, occasionally answering with the few words he had managed to learn. Instead, Hong remained silent. His face was serious and he was sweating profusely.
Tell Hong to be calm. I'm sure his wife will be fine. We'll be taking care of her and his baby soon,
he asked Min Trao. He began translating when they came to a small wooden bridge that passed over a 3-meter wide canal. Just as they crossed, there was an explosion behind them on the right bank.
Fuck. That was close.
Alvarez looked in the rearview mirror. As he did so, he watched as Hong elbowed Min Trao and lunged at Alberto from behind.
What the fuck are you doing?
Alberto was surprised to feel Hong's hands on him.
I'm sorry,
Hong blurted out in archaic Spanish as he tugged at him, pushing him out of the moving car. Both rolled down as several bursts of machine gun fire passed over their heads. Alberto crawled on the ground, cursing himself for having nothing on him but a Colt 1911 pistol with a single magazine. As he did so, he could hear the jeep skid and Lieutenant Alvarez calling out to him. 2 more explosions shook everything between them. He tried to get up, but something hit him on the head and his legs collapsed. His last thought was the face of his wife and son. He was sorry that he had failed them, and that he had not been able to return home with them.